Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Dr. João, clinical and sport nutrition research part of science team Atlhetica Nutrition and one of leading supplement company. Today I'm honored to speak with on the world leading authorities on muscle health and myHMB science. Shawn is a vice president of business development at TSI Group and one of the top voice behind the clinical validities myHMB. Shawn, thank you so much for being here with today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me today.
We're going today into beyond the basics and exploring the science, clinical evidence, and real-world application of myHMB.
That sounds great. Looking forward to it.
Okay. What the first experience to work with a compound and what will make this too relevant today?
So I've been working with HMB since 1994. Although I wasn't working for the company yet, I was in grad school or just starting grad school, and I was working on one of the first research studies in humans. So what gravitated me towards the opportunity was because it was right around the time we were seeing more science coming into sports nutrition. So around that time, we were seeing more research into things like creatine. We were seeing work around HMB, just going from animal nutrition to moving into human nutrition. And there was a lot of interest in getting scientific studies to back these claims around ingredients. So it was a very exciting time. And then the reason why I've stayed with it is every time we do another study, we see maybe a new path we can go down. We've seen data around cognitive health, just like what we see with creatine. We've seen some interesting data around improving cognitive health, longevity, more importantly, quality of life relative to muscle health. And then the new phenomenon with GLP-1 RA type medications, we're seeing the value of HMB for maintaining muscle in those populations. So it's been this ever evolving science around HMB that's kept me intrigued.
Yeah, fantastic. And could you explain what is myHMB and your mechanism of action and the difference to generic HMB compared to myHMB?
So first and foremost, HMB is an initialism for beta-hydroxy beta-methylbutyrate, which is a downstream metabolite of leucine. As I mentioned, we've been working on HMB research since the very, very early 1990s, and actually some of the work done prior to my joining of the team was done in the mid and late 1980s. Some of those team members are still around. So the depth and breadth of data on both efficacy and safety, as well as quality of the material manufactured, is really what sets myHMB apart from competing material in the marketplace, which typically the biggest difference is the quality. Besides what's the research is based on, it's also the quality issue that exists, because our myHMB product is, for the US, it's USP verified, which carries a lot of weight globally. We have informed choice certification on each lot. And I think the most important thing is understanding that we have a dedicated facility or facilities for manufacturing myHMB versus a lot of the other materials in the marketplace is made in industrial chemical facilities. So the quality can be, quite variable in some of that competing material. And we all know safety and efficacy is the very utmost to creating trust within the consumer brand, and more importantly, with the consumer, for an ingredient to be efficacious, but equally important, safe.
Perfect. And thinking clinical use case, which clinical applications of myHMB do you consider most promising?
First, I kind of missed one of your questions before when you asked about mechanism. There are other ingredients that can improve protein synthesis, but HMB, the uniqueness is that it can currently, at the exact same kind of process that you see an increase in protein synthesis, you can see a decrease in protein degradation. So then that net gain is what gives you this advantage, if you will. And relative to the various groups we've done research, we've looked at everything from intensely training athletes on the endurance and cardiovascular side with cyclists, runners, rowers, even combat athletes, all the way through to novice weightlifters, where some of our first studies looked at increasing muscle mass in individuals just starting exercise program. And then take that to the next step, we see improvements in body composition and more of that active lifestyle type of market. And then the next few steps have more to do with longevity and quality of life and recovery from potential issues, whether it be trauma, disease-related muscle loss, or as I mentioned before, looking at muscle loss associated with changes in diet or diet restriction. So everything from gastric bypass to GLP-1 RA users. So anywhere where there's a demand on our muscle, we see HMB providing pretty significant support to the individual to ensure maintaining muscle. And again, utilizing that mechanism of increasing protein synthesis while reducing protein breakdown. That's truly the key.
And Dr. Shawn, thinking in a safety and successful use, what is our optimal dose of myHMB for the best result in all clinical use?
The biggest kind of broad stroke of data that we have relative to dosing would point to 3 grams per day. And that being broken up into, obviously, if you can do 3 1-gram servings, that's ideal. 2 1.5 gram servings is obviously of value. And then again, 1 single dose of 3 grams, although not ideal, is still hitting your needs. It's just your blood levels go up and then they'll gradually go down. So if you can hit multiple spikes through the day, it ensures that your blood levels are adequate. Now, anytime we talk about optimal, we have to talk about, well, is it possible to get away with less? So our data shows that 1.5 grams, in essence, on average, would be kind of that minimal level, because it truly is a dose response curve. The more you take up to a certain point, you get a nice incremental increase in benefit. Now, the one thing I do want to point out is that our dosing is actually not just a flat 3 grams per day. Yeah. In some of our studies, we've really looked at it in this light of, well, let's not assume somebody my size would have the same as, say, the size of my wife, who's probably half my body weight. We probably shouldn't be using the same dose. And that's really what it comes down to, is what's that optimal dose per kilogram of body weight? And what that is 38 milligrams of HMB per 38 milligrams of calcium HMB per kilogram of body weight. So then if you do the math on that, the average person is around 3 grams per day. If you're looking at that 1.5, it'd be obviously 19 milligrams of calcium HMB per kilogram of body weight per day.
And it's very difficult to us consume this dose, for example, in whey protein or in another protein source. I think to us give 3 grams HMB, we have 16 grams to leucine or 600 grams of whey protein. That's correct. That's right.
Right. So let's just kind of break that down really quick. So if we look again where I mentioned HMB is a downstream metabolite of leucine. So one might think, well, I'll just consume more leucine and I'll get that benefit. Well, only about 5% of leucine is converted to HMB. And then that's making the assumption that if we increase that level of leucine, we're going to continue to get 5%. And we don't know for sure if that's the case, because many times you start getting things, when you look at biochemistry and physiology, you get feedback inhibition. So as you metabolize more and more HMB or more leucine into HMB, there might be some type of switch that diverts that. We don't know. So the assumption is that it would take 60 grams of leucine. It may take more, but then you ask, all right, well, where am I going to get that 60 grams of leucine? If I'm going to try and get that from a leucine-rich protein like say whey, you're right, it would be 600 grams of protein. Now, does somebody do that? Yeah, somebody might be able to do that in a day, but that's not very realistic, nor is it very repeatable. I'll just say that, again, there's a big assumption then that the amount of leucine coming from that large bolus of protein taken multiple times, that somehow you're going to force that 5% to HMB every time. We don't know that for sure. So the easy solution, like the term supplement means, let's supplement our diet with a readily available form of that same metabolite, HMB.
Yeah, perfect. And Dr. Shawn, at Atlhetica Nutrition, we are proud to have an exclusive partnership with TSI Group to bring myHMB to Brazil. In collaboration with our team, we have Desenvolvimento, several and unique formulations fit myHMB, and I love to your sound scientific rationale behind each one. Our first product is a cell tour, which blend with vitamin D3 and myHMB. We know there is strong evidence to support this synergy. Could you explain why this combo works so well together?
So I'll give you quickly a little bit of background of how we made this discovery. So we were doing a study actually in older adults, looking to maintain muscle as they age. It was a year-long study. So these subjects volunteered for a study that would last for 12 months. What was interesting is after the study, we had clear evidence of an increase in muscle mass. Even some individuals were more of a maintenance, while the placebo or control group continued to lose. But in the H&B group, we saw a significant difference or greater amount of muscle mass at the end of the 12 months with H&B supplementation. But what was interesting is we didn't necessarily see the equivalent improvement in muscle strength and function. And we started looking at why would that be? And that's where we came across doing, it just happened to be kind of one of those random chance aha moments. When you're looking at some data, we realized, because doing vitamin D analysis, there was some individuals that didn't respond well that had, I wouldn't call it deficiency. We're not talking like the level of rickets, but we're looking at, where you start looking at kind of this optimal dose that started to appear in the literature of, or I shouldn't say optimal, but sufficient dose that's in the literature saying, yeah, we have this deficiency level, then we have a sufficiency level. And when we stratified the data by that sufficiency, we realized that that was the difference between the individuals with HMB that had positive effects on both mass and function and strength versus mass and not seeing the equivalent improvement in strength and function. So we knew something was going on. And if you start looking more and more at the literature, we always used to think of vitamin D as, first thing that pops in your head is bone health. You have to take vitamin D to make sure you're getting calcium deposited into that bone, and you have a healthy bone structure for a lifetime. And if you look at an aging population, especially women, you really looked at it and said, make sure you're getting vitamin D and calcium. Well, then you start looking at some of the literature, and we see benefits of sufficiency of vitamin D in everything from cancer patients, cardiovascular health. We see just a whole host of cellular function benefits. And that's really what it comes down to. To answer your question, it really is, H&B has an effect on muscle with or without vitamin D. But when you add vitamin D, you ensure that you get this sufficiency that allows for optimal cellular function. And that cellular function clearly is a muscle cell, and that means, the proper type of contraction, the force production, all those things that we look at as cellular function from a muscle cell standpoint, we see that benefit because it's not just about making a muscle bigger. We want to make sure that muscle is functioning and is, in essence, measures of strength and measures of ability to perform work or activity is critically important. So if a person has lower levels of vitamin D and they take HMB, yes, they're still going to see a benefit. But when you add that vitamin D, we see that it is synergistic. We actually see these improvements in strength and function that are greater than the two individuals alone.
Oh, fantastic. And Dr. Shawn, the second product is our amino AG, a unique combination of essential amino acids and myHMB. We know he is widely used by athletes, especially in endurance sports. From your perspective, what does the presence of myHMB in your amino AG make this formula stand out compared to standard amino acid supplements on the market?
Looking at essential amino acids and HMB, and I feel the same way about high quality protein as I do the statements I'm going to make about essential amino acids, but let's just talk about it a little bit. So first and foremost, just to set a level playing field here that we all understand, what essential amino acids are. These are truly the ones that we cannot develop within our body, make within our body. So it truly is something that is essential to come from our diet. Now, thinking back to what I said about the mechanism of action for HMB, it increases protein synthesis and reduces protein breakdown. So just looking at the protein synthesis side, to build muscle, we need the whole gamut of amino acids, which includes essential amino acids. So if we're looking at recovery, we're looking at optimal muscle health and increase with the increases of protein synthesis. When we have those essential amino acids, we don't have any limiting steps. The great kind of way I was taught, I don't want to say how many years ago, but I've already kind of alluded to is over 30 years ago. We always referred to amino acids as the building blocks, right? Yeah. So if we think of HMB as the foreman at the job site, he's telling, the people to build the brick wall. Well, that brick wall has very unique bricks. And essential amino acids are the ones that we can't make on the job site. We have to bring them in. And when we bring them in, we can make a complete wall. So that's why, in my opinion, that's why essential amino acids are critical with HMB, because you're, in essence, providing those very specific building blocks. And then you can get into a whole host of, well, can I just do the same thing with just taking a high quality protein? Yes, you can. But when you look at essential amino acids, one of the important things to think about is, especially in the athletes you mentioned, if we're talking about endurance athletes that are really trying to maintain a set body weight while they're optimizing their performance, delivering large amounts of macro, nutrients like protein, carbohydrate, and fat, if I can really hone in on what I exactly need from that protein without bringing in any additional calories, it's really important to look at it from a perspective of delivering those targeted nutrients. Now, I'm not saying we bypass macronutrients and micronutrients. I'm just saying for a targeted supplement, it just does that. It supplements those very important amino acids in the already existing diet.
And thinking the best moment to use amino acids with myHMB in the specific population, the endurance athletes, it's better used during in the exercise or post-workout or the both moment?
So that's a really good question. As I mentioned before, we talked about dosing. We have these, after you consume it, you get the blood levels go up and then they slowly start to taper down. If we can stack multiple doses up, we get that optimal benefit. Now, going back to the question, if I want to have the protective effect that we see from HMB, which is another mechanism of action, we see actually the metabolic fate of HMB goes to HMG-CoA, which goes to cholesterol metabolism, which isn't the cholesterol that is like our HDL, LDL, VDL. It's actually the cholesterol that is in the cell membranes. So one of the working mechanisms of action that were originally thought of years and years ago was that HMB supplementation, in addition to signaling protein synthesis and reducing protein degradation, is that it's metabolized into our cellular cholesterol, which a stronger cell's membrane is protective. So going back to the question now, and we have data to show that HMB over the past 30 years, we've shown this very consistently. If you take HMB, you get this improvement on this protective effect, in addition to these effects on protein synthesis and protein degradation. So back to your question, if I were looking at the optimal dosing, it is really important that the blood levels are elevated and I have those nutrients available before, during, and after. How's that accomplished? You can take that product, whether it be an hour before, you can take it 30 minutes, an hour after, and then I ensure those peaks aren't just one peak and drop. It's continuing to go across my day. And as we all know, many times supplements or brands try and push products towards a direction of, this is so important for when you're training. But just as important is the recovery process after we train, or after we've done something that is in high intensity. You're exerting yourself and you've created these demands. It just doesn't end when you stop working out. That's when the work actually begins to repair any type of damage that's there, to turn on protein synthesis, naturally from the stimulus of exercise. And, obviously, if the nutrients are there, you get the switches turned in the right direction and you feed the system so that you do get recovery, you do build more muscle, and you do get stronger, faster. Whatever the goal is of training, you're optimizing that with having those nutrients throughout the before, during, and after.
The use of GLP-1 agonists such semaglutide, Ozempic, Wegovy, and tirzepatide, Mounjaro, or Zepbound is growing worldwide. And while these medications promote a significant weight loss, that we know, and the health professionals are seeing a significant association loss of lean mass due to food restriction. In your opinion, could myHMB play a significant role in helping patients on GLP-1 therapy maintain overall muscle and metabolic health?
So the short answer is yes. We have every belief to think that it will support the GLP-1 RA user. To give you a little background, with HMB, we've always seen improvements in body composition. Now, the biggest assumption is if we're increasing muscle mass by a ratio, if my fat stays here and I increase my muscle mass, the percent body composition is shifted towards a positive. But what we actually see, fat doesn't stay here. When HMB increases muscle mass, we also see a concurrent decrease. So years ago, we started looking into, is there something else going on besides the signaling in increasing protein synthesis and reducing protein degradation? And if you think of the way our bodies work, muscles and muscle cells and fat cells don't live in a silo where it's all interrelated. So when we spare protein, in other words, if we have a calorie restriction and somehow we're able to protect protein, it makes sense that if a signaling molecule can spare that protein, it should be turning on switches to increase fat metabolism. And what we actually see is in cell culture work, we see increases in lipolysis and fat cells. But equally important, we actually see an increase in beta oxidation in muscle cells. In other words, the muscle cells start using the freed up free fatty acids from the stored fats or lipids in fat cells. So the fat cells, HMB increases lipolysis, that those free fatty acids come into the bloodstream, the muscles take them up, and we see an improvement in beta oxidation, which is the burning of fat by muscle. That's a nice way of saying it. In reality, it's just energy utilization by the muscle for that lipid. Now, what else can it do relative to that example? That's what we're trying to explore right now, because we've had data in time-restricted feeding, so intermittent fasting, where there's periods of reduced calorie consumption or no calorie consumption, and then an intense period of time where they might, eat all their meals in a day in a 8-hour window and fasting for 16. HMB has been shown to improve muscle mass, strength, and maintain that muscle instead of seeing that catabolism that typically occurs with calorie restriction or calorie manipulation. Now, we also have looked at HMB and vitamin D in patients that are, or subjects that are middle-aged, exercise, and what we found was that with a calorie restriction, in other words, kind of self-limitation, along with a general exercise program, we see an increase in the utilization of stored fat within the muscle. So that intramuscular adipose tissue, or the fat that exists between our muscles, we see a decrease with HMB supplementation or improvement in utilization. In other words, that beta oxidation of using fat stores for energy when calories are restricted is much, much better than using muscle, breaking it down for gluconeogenesis and using that. So all the mechanisms point in the right direction. And we are currently doing studies. We just finished some work. It's not ready to be published yet, but we're doing work in some animal models for GLP-1 RAs combined with HMB and without HMB, and looking at changes in composition. And then we received a grant, and we're also doing that. Now we're moving into humans. So we're very excited of where this research is going. Just as I said before, this is what keeps us motivated from a researching standpoint, the opportunities and the consumers that we can benefit, and seeing the improvement in what we know is a very, very large population of people that are taking, have taken, and eventually will take the GLP-1 RAs. We want to make sure that we're maintaining muscle so we don't get into this really extreme yo-yo dieting kind of situation where they go on the medication, they lose a lot of fat and a lot of muscle. They go off, they gain back the fat, not the muscle, and then it becomes this ever declining kind of result of lost muscle mass. We want to be the front and the pioneer around protecting muscle with this population, because HMB can do this naturally.
Oh, fantastic. Dr. Shawn, thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. And for health professionals who want to learn more, I recommend to visiting myHMB.com. And at Atlhetica Nutrition, we are proud to include myHMB in your formulations. Always committed to translating science into real results. Thank you once again for your time and your insights.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate the opportunity today. It was great talking with you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.